Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm doing fine.
Good. Is that all?
Drinking a giant bottle of Coke. What do you want to know?
Oh, I don't know. I'm always interested in your welfare, and if you've been to any amusing parties or anything, so much the better.
No, I have a good one coming up this week.
What's that?
Ariana's giving a party for the X Prize. I don't know why she's decided to affiliate with the X Prize people.
What is the X Prize
It's
again?
actually very smart on her part.
She's no dummy, but what's the X Prize?
They give, they've offered 100, I think it's 20 million or 100 million if you could send a robot to the moon. They were the people that offered the space prize that I think Burt Rutan won.
Right.
And it's a very smart way for her to leverage. You know, she's just a person with a burgeoning media empire, but if she knows a lot of rich people, and if she can get together these funds that offer $20 million to do this and that, it gets an incredible amount of attention, and it's actually very smart of her to affiliate with them. Anyway, she's giving a party with those people, so it'll be interesting to see the Ariana people and the X Prize geeks. I assume they're geeks.
Well, you should take your camcorder. Do a little work for us.
I'm not one of those people, and I'm incompetent at using it anyway.
Well, speaking of burgeoning media empires, Mickey, first of all, I think, reflecting on it now, Blogging Heads TV may want to enter that X Prize thing. That'd be a great branding opportunity to get the logo on the moon. And I think we have the funds. I think we can do it, and we have the technology. But also, there have been a couple of Blogging Heads sightings lately. Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
Do you even know what a Blogging Head sighting is?
I didn't even know that Blogging Heads was something that could be cited.
Well, here's an example. Rosa Brooks is sitting in some Starbucks-type place in Washington. Somebody walks up to her and says, "Are you Rosa Brooks?" She says, "Yes." And they say, "I saw you on Blogging Heads TV." That happened recently. And she says she's been on Fox and NBC and MSNBC, but nobody's ever come up and said, "Hey, I saw you on regular TV." Right? Meanwhile,
only Blogging Heads viewers lack that sort of built-in social inhibition that stops you from accosting strangers.
Oh, you mean because we don't put ourselves up on a pedestal, they think we're approachable?
No, it's because we're only watched by people who
have poor impulse control,
who are cowering in their bedrooms and never interact with people, and so don't recognize that there are limits.
I see. Well, that's one interpretation, and thanks for sharing that with the audience, Mickey.
Okay.
But wait. Meanwhile, in San Francisco, Josh Cohen had a similar experience. He walked up and said, "Didn't I see you on Blogging Heads?" And people laughed when I said this was going to become a global media juggernaut. But when you think about it, between Washington and San Francisco, okay, that's America right there. America is the world's sole remaining superpower. So, I say mission accomplished, as our president might put it.
That happens to me all the time, Bob.
Does it? By the way, does it? Ever?
It happens about once a week that I discover that somebody has seen me on Blogging Heads.
Ah, that's kind of the same thing.
They don't accost me on the street.
Well, you people, it's kind of like being in the presence of God. People, they avert their eyes.
The only time that must be it. The only time that I've ever been accosted on the street regularly was when in the '88 campaign. I was on this really sort of low-rent political analysis show that they showed after between the ball game and the honeymooners on a second-tier New York local channel, and everybody knew who I was.
See, you inherited the ball game crowd.
I inherited the ball game and the honeymooners.
Wow.
But after that, it's all been downhill.
Including this. Well, I'm sorry to hear that.
That was my peak.
But enough amusing banter. We were going to actually talk about things.
Right. No.
And you, in particular, do you have some issue with Jane Hampshire? I thought she was like a friend or something.
Well, she's a friend. She's a woman who I see all the time.
And she's Fire Dog Lake, right?
I saw her at a blogger party.
The massive traffic blog Fire Dog Lake.
She's Fire Dog Lake. She's very smart. She made your favorite movie, Bob.
Which is, again?
She made Natural Born Killers. I know.
But I like the blog.
I know you love Natural Born Killers.
Yeah.
And it wrote a very good book about it, apparently, about what a mess it was.
Okay.
And I saw her last week at a party. She was very friendly, but she attacks me at every available opportunity, or she does more than attack me. She sort of writes, I can't believe anybody is paying attention to that guy anymore. So it's not even worth it. I'm not even worth attacking. But she looked great. I will tell you that. She looked glowing.
Would you say that about a man, Mickey?
Well, she's been battling cancer, so the fact that she looked glowing was an exceptionally optimistic sign.
Okay.
So there.
Well, okay. I learned my lesson. Never ask a spontaneous question.
But anyway, she attacked Elizabeth Edwards after this MoveOn ad attacking General Petraeus as General Petraeus, or that was the headline anyway. Elizabeth Edwards said, well, I grew up in a military family, and nobody who served his country as General Petraeus has deserves that. And this prompted Jane Hampshire to discipline Elizabeth Edwards and say, you never repeat right-wing talking points to attack your own, ever. You never enter the echo chamber as a participant, ever. You never give them the hammer to beat the left with. Just don't do it. And urged her instead, what happens is, when offered this opportunity to culture your own side, you pivot and attack. This is sort of obviously...
You know, the tone of voice you use when you read that suggests that you're not poised to agree with it.
No, I think it represents sort of the ur-text now of what Tom McGuire, the Just 1 Minute blogger, calls Fight Club Democrats, which is, you know, everything is like a fight, and you never give any quarter and never make any concessions, and you know, even when the other side has a good talking point, as it now has with, you know, now the right-wing talking point is on Hillary's plan is that she would require you to show proof of health insurance to go to work. Well, she did sort of say that. It is sort of vulnerable, so rather than sort of defend it, you somehow are supposed to sort of ignore it, or, you know, you're never supposed to make any concessions. And first, this pollutes politics. It means that politics stops being sort of an asymptotically tending toward the truth as people agree, but it sort of...
Wow, I didn't know politics was doing that, but go ahead. That's great news.
Well, sure it does.
Politics?
When people are civil, sure.
Political discourse?
Yeah, welfare reform. Used to be a contentious issue. You know?
But then your side won, and so truth had been realized.
Well, my side won, and the other side had to concede that we didn't end up with a disaster with people sleeping in the streets. So, therefore, we've moved closer to the truth.
Yeah. And that debate over whether to invade Iraq, yeah. Come to think of it, you're right. That's the way it works in politics.
Well,
anyway, sorry, that's a tangent. Go ahead.
I think we have moved closer to the truth on that. I think most people think the invasion,
but not through discourse, through trial and error.
Well, trial and error is part of it. But anyway, you know, if the Republicans never concede that they were wrong, we're not going to make much progress. But I think Republicans will concede they were wrong, and Democrats who voted for the war.
You don't maintain that the Fight Club Democrats are kind of unique, right? I mean, it seems to me there were Fight Club Republicans before there were Fight Club Democrats. There were angry Republicans before there were angry Democrats.
And the Fight Club Democrats were modeled very consciously after the Fight Club Republicans. Okay. But the Fight Club Republicans were wrong, too. They were effective, I agree. But, you know, I care about the Democrats because I am a Democrat, and I don't want to see their commitment to the truth perverted by a rancorous groupthink partisanship.
Yes, I know. You always have the interests of the Democrats at heart.
Absolutely, in the long run. And the other thing is, that's not true. The other thing is, as James Toronto pointed out, you know, Hampshire then goes on to say, well, you should MoveOn Elizabeth Edwards because they're sticking on an extreme position on the left that makes you look moderate. Well, yeah, the way Elizabeth Edwards emphasizes that is by criticizing MoveOn. I mean, Hampshire can't have it both ways. Either MoveOn is taking an extreme position that makes Elizabeth Edwards moderate, and then she can establish her moderation by positioning herself to the right of MoveOn, or else MoveOn isn't performing that function.
Well, I guess I would go so far as to say that I would agree that whenever possible, people like Elizabeth Edwards should avoid repeating right-wing talking points. On the other hand, it seems to me a sign of what a stupid idea that MoveOn ad was, that when you look at the position it leaves Edwards or any Democrat in, they almost have to speak out about. I mean, if you're John Edwards, if you're the Edwards campaign, it's kind of hard to keep pretending you haven't seen it. So you almost have to say something. And what are you going to say? I mean, you would be totally crazy to say, yeah, they've got a good point, because that just reinforces every conservative stereotype about Democrats. No, actually, only one stereotype, but a very damaging one. You know, when you start accusing generals of treason, that's exactly what, I mean, implicitly a treason-like activity. That's exactly how the conservatives want to depict Democrats. That's why it was such a stupid ad. And I mean, what is the Edwards campaign supposed to do once MoveOn.org has done something that ill-advised? They can, I guess, keep claiming they don't know what you're talking about when you ask about it.
You just criticized MoveOn. Knock it off. Knock it off. Just knock it off. You're not supposed to do that.
No, I said this is an ad.
You just echoed a right-wing talking point.
Well, first of all, I'm not... She was talking about presidential candidates and their campaigns. I don't consider myself to be running for president, although, Mickey, if you start a draft movement...
I think it's a more general principle than that.
What?
I think it is a more general principle than that, but you're right that this article only talks about candidates.
In any event, I mean, the thing about the MoveOn ad is, what are you supposed to do? Just, I guess, remain silent is what you're supposed to do. But there are some people who are not in a position where they can realistically do that. It was a stupid, stupid, stupid ad. And the only thing I can imagine it did for MoveOn.org is help their fundraising.
It's also idiotic politics, because the mass of the American people want to get over this partisanship. So if you run a viciously partisan campaign where you never concede error, you're going to turn off a lot of people. What's the and rightly so. What was one of the most effective political moves I've seen recently was when Arnold Schwarzenegger was accused of serial groping of women. He didn't pivot and attack. He said, "Where there's smoke, there's fire." He basically admitted it. And as a result, he was elected governor. It's just idiotic to assume.
Well, that seems to me like a very, very different situation. But
he echoed the left-wing meme attacking him, which was that where there's smoke, there's fire.
Yeah, it was preemptive agreement, and and it worked for him. Yeah.
Well, that's what Elizabeth Edwards was trying.
I don't know if that's parallel, but anyway, I mean. I think we don't disagree on this so radically that continued discussion would be all that entertaining.
Well, except you're constantly criticizing me because I love to criticize Democrats.
Well, no, but that's because in your case, your heart is manifestly with the Republicans. Is my argument anyway? I'm not saying you should never do it. I'm saying in your case, it's a pattern that adds up to
Oh, Bob, that's a cheap thing for you to say, and you just say it to generate artificial controversy to interest blogging heads.
Well, that too, but I also believe it. I mean, we had this argument before there was blogging heads, Mickey, during the Kerry campaign. You may recall.
That's true.
But anyway, I mean, now the underlying Petraeus thing. We last spoke before the big Petraeus appearance. Did you have any big thoughts on that?
I have no big thoughts on it, other than. To the extent that I paid any attention to it at all, because it seemed all like a cut-and-dried, foregone conclusion, my impression is he was ambiguous about whether, he's really going to pursue a unitary government. They seem to just be feeling their way. They know they can't, extend the Anbar model in cookie-cutter fashion to the rest of the country, so they're trying to sort of cut separate deals in different provinces with whatever sheikhs are there. To the extent that it's a bottom-up process, at the end of the day, who really needs the central government? As Charles Kreithammer pointed out, who needs it to control any more than Baghdad itself? So, to some extent, it's unclear whether they're bolstering the Maliki government or undermining the Maliki government. But my view on it is, all hell will break loose when we leave. But after 6 months of the surge, the hell that will break loose is a little smaller than the hell that would have broken loose 6 months ago. So as long as the hells keep getting smaller, let's keep the surge going.
I don't know. I mean, actually, in the course of his testimony and the comment on it, I became a little more skeptical as to how much good the surge has done. It may have done a little, but, there was... one thing that showed up on Matt's blog, and by his own account, it was he had derived it from someone whose name I wish I could recall.
Matt being Matt Iglesias.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you. Sure. Matt Iglesias' blog, he pointed out that on when Petraeus had these maps that in very kind of visually effective fashion showed declining violence in Baghdad graphically, juxtapose the maps, however long ago with the maps now, and,
right.
and the little, the burning areas representing violence kind of got subdued and smaller. And this guy that Matt was drawing on pointed out that, also on these maps was a sectarian breakdown of Baghdad.
Right.
And they were actually wrong because they both had the exact same sectarian breakdown, and in fact the breakdown the composition had changed over time due to ethnic cleansing. And another general had shown maps over that period that actually accurately reflected the sectarian composition. And if you paid attention to the changing sectarian composition, one hypothesis that really acquired some credibility is that the declining violence was due to the fact that the ethnic cleansing had happened.
Right.
In more and more places.
But why is that a bad thing? If you believe
I'm not saying
in
it's a
partition,
bad thing. I'm just saying that is not the surge at work. That's ethnic cleansing at work. I said what I started out saying was, in the course of Petraeus' testimony and commentary, I became more skeptical that the surge has manifestly done a whole lot of good. And as James Joyner pointed out in his recent dialogue with Ezra Klein, and other people have noted, I mean, the improvement in on-bar is not a result of the surge. So I'm not. Well, you just said, well, thanks to the surge, things are better over 6 months. That's not so clear to me. And also, the decline in violence reflected in those maps had started before the surge, which is also consistent with the idea that it had a lot more to do with ethnic cleansing. I don't doubt that the surge has done something to damp down the violence in some neighborhoods, but it may not have done.
But it also may allow the ethnic cleansing and the people to leave in with a relative minimum of violence and make it more efficient, as it were.
Could. By the way, the guy's name is Elon Goldenberg that Matt was drawing on. Could. I don't know. But having said that, I am not among the severe Petraeus critics even at this point. I mean, on the left, it's kind of standard now to be dismissive of him and critical of what a kind of media manipulator he is. But in a certain sense, you want an effective media manipulator to be in charge of an anti-insurgency campaign, because so much of it is about fostering the right climate of public opinion. You actually want somebody who's image conscious.
Absolutely. There is a contradiction in the anti-surge position, which is in Anbar, I think, which people say, well, it happened without the military, and then they say, well, it's going to collapse as soon as our military leaves. Well, it's either one or the other. I think the military came in late and helped.
Well, okay, conceivably, I don't know how much of that military force is part of the surge per se. We were there before the surge, but I don't know. It's.
Are you for continuing the surge or against? That's the bottom line.
Well, apparently the surge per se is not going to be continued if you see a surge as an ongoing increase in troop presence.
Bob, come on. You know what question I'm asking. The Democrats want to cut off the surge now. They would like to end it now. They want to start withdrawing on some sort of orderly timetable. And the Bush policy is to continue the surge as long as he can until the troops have to come back in the spring or according to rotation. Are you for the Democratic position or the Republican position?
I think I'm studiously agnostic, but again, to the extent that the ultimate stakes are, do we keep troops in Iraq in the long run, I say if withdrawing pretty fast is the only way to keep us from maintaining the troops in the long run, I say get out, because I just think the troop presence will be counterproductive.
Why is it necessarily that true that withdrawing now is the only way to have us have troops in the long run? We're going to have a new president. They're going to decide whether to have troops in the long run.
Could be, but I actually have, as I've said, I think to some extent the argument, that is the subtext of the argument. And the people who are against withdrawal, what they're really afraid of is us winding up with no permanent bases in Iraq. And I don't think we should have permanent bases in Iraq.
You've changed the question. Are you for the surge or against?
Mickey, I've said all along, this situation is too chaotic for me to be confident
You just don't want to admit that you're for the surge because it's a Republican position.
No, it is. No, it really isn't that. I'm not. As I said, my most recent wave of opinion drift has been away from the surge in the sense that I'm less convinced now than 2 weeks ago that it's really done an appreciable amount of good.
I wasn't arguing about your recent drift. I was saying, what is your position? Maybe you were all the way over here and you're over here, but you're still on the pro-surge side, I think.
Well, if that's your view, then that's at least your view of my view, whether or not it's my view. I mean,
Jane Hampshire would have a few words with you.
Why? Because I'm on the fence?
Because yes, you're on the fence. You're more than on the fence. You're sort of on the Republican side, as am I. So why don't you admit it?
No, you say that. I'm not saying I think the surge is a great idea. I just genuinely don't know. It's a chaotic situation. It's not like, look, before the war, it seemed to me very clear cut. There were all these costs associated with the war. I was against it. That was an unpopular position. So don't act like I'm always blowing with the winds of opinion or something. When I think something is clear, I say it.
I think you're subject to social pressures not to seem too Republican.
I think you're just flat out wrong. I mean, I think...
Anyway, just having an agnostic
an interesting point that came up in that Ezra Klein, James Joyner dialogue was, something Ezra said was that, why is it not the case that actually heightening the tensions might be more conducive to getting the Iraqis to work things out? In other words, maybe the American presence is their excuse not to work things out.
Well, certainly I think there's a tendency, more and more people are coming around to this idea that providing them with breathing space and security would enable them to work things out didn't work. That strategy didn't work. And it's really an Arab bazaar mentality, which is you only cut the deal when you absolutely have to cut the deal, and then you cut it at the last minute.
That's actually just an effective negotiating.
Okay,
but
one of its manifestations is buying a rug, I believe.
One of many.
Yes.
But as I've also said, I mean, the surge right now, as you alluded to, the underlying logic is totally, if not just unclear, it's like contradictory. As I got into last, there's no sense in repeating all that. But I mean. They're on the one hand empowering these decentralized militias that will undermine the centralized government, but supposedly the plan still has something to do with keeping a strong central government. I am just not a big supporter of the current policy. You are, Mickey. I am not.
No, I just think it's better. I think they're feeling their way and they're doing the best they can, and so far they've made some progress because the disaster that will happen when we leave
I'm not convinced they're doing the best they can. I think the strong incentive for Bush is to, at all costs, not admit defeat, which withdrawal is. So I don't trust that he's doing the best he can. I think he's thinking about his legacy. I don't think he's necessarily got the interests of the United States at the front of his mind.
My impression is that Petraeus is trying to set things up province by province so that things are more stable and that there's less violence. And that they're more stable in a way that allows us to extract ourselves without violence spiking up. The standard left meme, which I assume you reject, is, we can pull out and, we're making the problem worse, so when we pull out, nothing horrible will happen. Nothing horrible for any particular length of time, and I just think that's crazy. And Juan Cole thinks it's crazy. He knows more than I do. So
what's his position? Is he in terms of withdrawal?
His position is that, all hell is going to break loose. That was baked into the cake when we made the foolish decision to intervene, and Bush's engineering things so that the hell is going to break loose on a Democrat's watch, and this is going to set up the Republicans for taking power the election after the next one, when a Democrat has to provide over the inevitable hell breaking loose in Iraq.
So he says keep the troops there?
No, I don't. He says that the best hope for the Democrats is that Petraeus, against all odds, succeeds in tamping down violence in a way that lets us withdraw. But he's just generally pessimistic, I think.
So should we move on to Iran, which is right next door to Iraq?
Yes.
You wanted to kind of do this right. There is this invade Iran mean floating? I mean, there's this idea that there's a lot of scuttlebutt to the effect that the administration is this time it's really going to happen. We're poised to do anything any month now, and so on, right?
Well, there's a steady drumbeat. Tom Edsel has a column in the Huffington Post, sort of documenting this steady drumbeat, mainly from neocons, but. There was a very good article that I'm not sure I agree with by Steve Clemens, which I think is the go-to piece on this issue. And Clemens of the New America Foundation argues that, sure, there's this drumbeat of war, but don't believe it. We're not about to go to war with Iran. Bush has recognized that the costs are too high. The costs being A, they can really get back at us in Iraq. B, there'd be a crescent of anti-American semi-revolution across the Mideast. C, Russia and China would wind up in control of the oil spigot, and that there was a according to Clemens there was a national security meeting in December of 2006 reported on by Joe Klein, where Bush was basically told by the generals, look, the costs are way too high, and he opted for Plan B, which is fomenting insurrection in Iran, not actually striking them. And the drumbeat you hear is the neocons who have been losing the debate, trying to start some momentum to strike Iran, precisely because they don't have the ear inside the White House. That's a little too neat, but at least he's sort of grappling with the issue.
Yeah, James Joyner had an item, I think, saying that no, you shouldn't believe that war is imminent, but a different explanation. I think he was saying that it's actually purposeful, signals being sent to Iran to keep them off balance and make them worry that if they step too far over the line, there will be hell to pay or something. But to me, that seems almost to suggest more internal coherence and unity within the administration than I think really exists these days. The idea that there's this unified strategy to get a message like that out, because I do think that there supposedly is still tension between the Cheney wing and the Condi wing.
Well, everybody agrees there's a Mutt and Jeff thing going on. I think.
I would also, I've talked before about Bush's religious psychology, and I would say, having been brought up Southern Baptist, that you should keep in mind that, he's a very serious evangelical Christian. It's pretty clear and on the record that he did believe before the Iraq invasion that God had told him to invade. I don't mean come down from the clouds and told him, but I'm sure he prayed over it and he got a sense that he took as God's affirmation that he should invade. And I will tell you, the way the psychology works is when you do what you think God told you to do, it doesn't work out. The logic is always, well, it's part of the larger plan. This is a stepping stone to something bigger that I'm supposed to do. And invading Iran would be pretty big. And I know that's conjectural, speculative, but I would bet almost any amount of money that has at least crossed his mind. Because I assure you, he's trying to make sense of why it is that God told him to do something that did not apparently work out.
Well, but I thought his argument was in the long run of history, he'll be like Churchill, and people will see that, like Truman, and people will see that he was really right all along.
But there has to be some sense in which things work out if the long run of history is going to... You mean that in 30 years Iraq will be a democracy or something?
Or that people will say, even in quasi-Marxist fashion, that this was a step on the progress of history to bigger and better things. And you don't need to bomb Iran to have that happen.
Now, I think Bush wants to be remembered as more than antithesis in the great Hegelian dialectic, personally. But I
just worry because he's frustrated domestically, and he can do this, and nobody can stop him, and he disdains small ball and small steps, and he wants to. This is his last chance to leave a mark on history. Every psychological impulse that we could think of would tend to lead him to do the bold thing that he can do, and he's sort of the last person you want in that role at the moment.
Well, would you bet right now that that by the end of his by the next inauguration day we will have bombed or invaded Iran?
Well, Clemens said that he was at a dinner party where they took a vote, and there were all sorts of luminaries there, like Brzezinski and Scowcroft and Benazir Bhutto, and the vote was something like 18-2 on that question that we would have bombed
That
Iran.
he would?
Would.
Whoa.
Yes.
That's not totally reassuring.
People were voting their fears, not their real expectations.
You know, speaking of bombing, one thing that got pretty little, surprisingly low-profile coverage, I thought, was that Israel bombs Syria. Did you know that?
I agree. I do. I know it. Yes, of course I know it.
But I mean, you kind of barely do. That's the kind of coverage you got, right?
But I don't quite understand what was going on.
Well, apparently, the latest explanation, the first explanation I heard was that they were trying to interdict supply lines from Iran to Hezbollah in Lebanon. But the latest explanation, which seems like the real one, I guess, is that there was some kind of North Korean contact with Syria leading Israel and probably us to think that there was some sort of nuclear thing going on. So in that sense, it would be exactly parallel to the Israel strike against Iraq, however long ago, and that got a ton of coverage. And this, it's partly because it kind of seeped out, I think. It's like I became, the reason that it hasn't gotten much coverage is, I don't remember how the Iraq thing came out, but it was like all at once. Everybody knew for sure it had happened. With this, there were reports that you first saw in the Middle East press, and nobody said anything. And Syria made a little bit of an issue of it, but didn't admit to an actual bombing. So I don't know, but it seems strange to me how little play it's gotten.
I agree. Possibly because reporters can't find out very much, and so they would just be, saying, what was that all about? But whereas with the Iraqi reactor, it was clear what it was all about. But yes, I agree. That should get more coverage, and and Britney Spears should get less.
And healthcare should get less. What a segue.
That's pretty professional, Bob.
Thank you. Have any thoughts on healthcare, Mickey?
Well, Hillary announced her plan. Everybody is praising Hillary for...
Not me, because I assiduously avoid learning about these things, and I'm counting on you to give me the Cliff Notes.
I only learn about them when I have to talk about them on Blogging Heads. Her plan allegedly emphasizes choices. People would be able to keep their current insurance. They'd be able to sign up for a subsidized, subsidized insurance pool. They'd be able to buy into the Medicare program even if they're not 65. So everybody just gets all these wonderful choices, and nobody has to do anything, and all the difficult issues are sort of hidden, and it sort of de-emphasizes what bothers people most about Hillary, which is the sense that she knows best. She wants to constrict people's choices and tell them what to do. All that is kept very much in the background.
Which was the stereotype associated with her last little healthcare venture in 1992 or 3.
Right, and she was behind mandatory vaccinations for kids, and that sort of a lot of people think that was a bad idea. Probably more people think it was a good idea, but that sort of is the sort of Hillary knows best attitude. Which I think is genuine, and that's why the right, in attacking the plan, has hit on this individual mandate. It has both an individual mandate and an employer mandate. Individuals have to buy health insurance. Large employers have to provide health insurance or pay into a fund, so it's pay or play. And she sort of speculated that, well, maybe one day in the future when you're applying for work, you'll have to show them the insurance card, which is particularly stupid because, as has been pointed out, it's the job that's supposed to let you get insurance. So maybe you don't have insurance until you get the job and can pay for it. There are other ways to enforce an individual mandate other than having employers do it, and when employers check for citizenship, liberals object. But when they check for insurance forms, they don't. Rush Limbaugh has been beating that like a drum. So they've hit on this Hillary knows best, the one aspect that seems Hillary knows best-ish. I'm not sure that is the the weak point of the plan. I can see a couple of weak points of the plan. First, it maintains the employer-based system. Admittedly, that there's you would think that people might segue out of the employer-based system and into these other systems, but why even have if you have an individual mandate, why do you need an employer mandate? I don't quite understand why. I love the idea that you can buy into Medicare, but I worry, and the right argues that, well, eventually everybody's going to buy into the government program so that private insurance will wither away. That doesn't bother me at all. What bothers me is that I don't quite see why there won't be a huge adverse selection problem. All the people with, severe, expensive diseases will sign up for the Medicare program because they won't be able to get private insurance, which means the Medicare program will become unaffordable, which means it'll spiral. There's a well-known vicious circle that leads to premiums getting more expensive, and then only really sick people sign up, and the premiums get even more expensive.
Well, that may be related to a question I had upon reading David Brooks's thing about this, which is all I read about it. And he says, you said there are employee mandates and individual mandates, meaning what? That every individual is legally compelled to have insurance?
Yes.
And every employer is legally compelled to provide it?
Big employers either have to pay or play. They have to provide it, or they have to pay an equivalent sum into the government to subsidize individuals.
Okay, then Brooks says, then there are the insurance companies, the designated bête noirs of the plan. They are commanded to insure everybody, which I think means that they are not allowed to discriminate against people with disabilities, right? Now, I don't know if that means they're not allowed to have a differential pricing structure.
I think that's what that means, and I think they're not, and I think...
You mean not even a different pricing structure?
I think that's right.
Okay, so the relatively healthy people will wind up subsidizing the relatively less healthy people, right?
Well, as happens in any insurance scheme, I think.
Well, yeah, except now it happens within an insurance company. If you look at their total pool of insured people, but insurance companies now can, in most states, not in the one I live in, but in most states, they are allowed to charge more to people with pre-existing conditions, right?
I think that would be ended, and I think.
Well, that's a big question.
And I think they will find various, subterfuges that let them do it anyway. The classic one is you have a health club at your plan, and so you attract healthy people. And even though you're required to insure sick people, you just don't. They somehow never find their way into your plan. Well, I don't understand what constructive role private insurance plays in all this. I must admit, I'm way on the left on that one, and maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me that whatever efficiencies private insurance can come up with is vastly outweighed by the ways that they make money, either by excluding certain medical treatments or by finding ways to not insure people who are really sick. And there's no way to separate the two, really, and in the end, who needs it?
Yeah, I don't know. The other thing in this Brooks column is he says, this time, rather than construct this huge edifice that's, like elaborately articulated, Hillary is going to be content to leave the details of the plan to Congress. That seems to me to be kind of asking for trouble. I mean, where is legislation more likely to be corrupted than in Congress, right? I mean, it seems to me if there's any hope ever for doing a good job of health care, it would be a strong president putting together a very clear-cut system and somehow having enough political capital to get it passed, right? I mean,
that's certainly what happened in the New Deal. But Roosevelt had like an 80-20 majority in the Senate, so.
Because, in Congress, you leave it to Congress, and it's basically going to be like the insurance companies, the pharmaceuticals, and AARP will decide what happens, right? Something like that?
I assume so, and it's very convenient for her, though, because it lets her pass the buck on various things like what will be the penalties if individuals don't sign up, and she says, oh, well, that'll all be worked out with Congress. So it's a convenient way for her to pass all the issues to somebody else. I don't think she really believes it. I don't think she's really going to.
Yeah, well, I will say, her last experience in healthcare, I have no idea really whether it was a good plan or not. But when you see how it bit the dust, it did not give you faith in the legislative process, because one of the key sources of its downfall was those ads put out by the insurance industry. What was it? Harry and Louise or something?
Yes.
And, it seems to me that one thing that should not be the pivotal question determining what kind of health system we wind up with is, would it call for some kind of disorienting change on the part of the insurance companies? It may be that the good approach does. Sorry, but...
The virtue of her approach is that, and this is the charge from the right, but it seems to be it's a virtue, not a defect, is that eventually the government programs would crowd out the private programs, and the private programs would disappear.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a way to produce this wrenching change in the insurance industry gradually over time, as opposed to all of a sudden by decree, and that's politically a better way to neutralize the insurance industry than just taking them on head on.
Okay.
And also, Hillary. It also, it also showed obviously that Hillary, like many other things, that Hillary had terrible judgment and was stubborn, etc. And she's doing her best to convince people that she's changed and doing a pretty good job of it. The other issue is at the top end. What happens? Can rich people opt out of the system, and what can they buy?
Right. There's another thing in this David Brooks, actually, that is kind of in his column, which is if healthcare reform doesn't fundamentally adjust benefits, well, then the system will still be unaffordable in the long run, which, brings up the dreaded rationing question, right? There's two things you can do. You can either say, well, the thing that people are more or less guaranteed in one way or another that every American has is a really stripped down minimalist version. So if you got a cartilage problem in your knee, sorry, that's not vital enough, and so on. You can't get really extraordinary expensive diagnostic treatments, and so on. And if that kind of grosses you out that only rich people have access to these things, then the only alternative that also saves costs is what I guess Britain still does, which is kind of rationing, which is something you can only do with a single payer system, right?
I'm not sure. I've never been clear that rich people. I think rich people can afford fancier care in Britain, and I think
they always kind of find a way.
The scary thing is the following, which is happening now to some extent, which is, everybody's in Medicare. Medicare says we'll pay $100 for this operation, and you, a doctor, can't charge $120, or else you have to pay for it outside of Medicare. That happens now. The next step is to say, not only can you not charge for it, but if you ever charge more for it, if you ever charge $120, you cannot ever take any Medicare patients again. And there was a whole controversy over that. And it does seem to me at that point, you really do start to restrict choices for the rich because a lot of doctors won't be able to make that leap. I don't think you want that. I think you want to have the safety valve. If you really think that this operation is going to save your life and it costs $100,000, you should be able to go pay for it. And the analogy is with private schools. If you really hate the public school system, you still have to pay your taxes for the public schools, but if you want to pay the freight for a private school, you can do it. And that was what Paul Starr said was the original Hillary plan, the private school analogy. But I don't quite think she'll necessarily follow through it, and I think there's something to the charge that eventually the logic of cost cutting leads you to want to shut down the private schools completely.
I continue to not know enough to pass judgment on any healthcare-related phenomena.
One final point. Jonathan Cohn writes about this plan in the New Republic. I recommend his article.
Does he like it?
He likes it. He likes them all. He's like a pantheistic, pro coverage person.
I think that's more like is that more polytheistic or pantheistic?
Anyway, he likes anything that he thinks there are 4 or 5 ways to get universal coverage, and he's for them all. But what he points, anyone is better than the status quo. What he points out is that Hillary has abandoned the goal of cost cutting. It's totally backburnered. All the focus is on universal coverage, not the focus on cost cutting, which, as you point out, is what got her into the problem with rationing and restricting choice last time. So, to that extent, as a hypochondriac who wants to spend half our gross national product on healthcare, I applaud this new de-emphasis on cost cutting.
Yeah, I may briefly mention your hypochondria again later, actually, but
I think you mention it every time, Bob.
Well, that's the point, which I'll get to. I'll get to that point. But we should talk about something else.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, we've actually eaten up a lot of time. So we were going to talk about two pieces having to do with the liberal and conservative mind, but maybe at this point we should confine it to the. I don't know. Well, whatever you think. But there was this study that came out about differences between the way liberals and conservatives respond to certain tests, and the simplification became kind of liberals are smarter. And then Will Salatan wrote this piece attacking the study. Did you read that piece?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty unconvincing, except for one point.
Actually, I think it may even be maybe even more unconvincing than you think. Why did you?
I thought the one point it had was that, it's sort of a tautology. By definition, people that favor continuing old ways are conservatives, and people who are open to change are not conservative. That's sort of the definition of conservative. So
okay, we should back up and say what the study was, right?
Sorry?
We should say a little something about the study that he was commenting on.
Go ahead.
It was a study of very kind of just simple little clinical neural tasks like, you're watching a screen and an M flashes, and if it's an M, you're supposed to, I don't know, press this button, and if it's a W, that one, and then maybe they'll do a bunch of M's in a row and change it to a W. I don't know, but it was testing your information processing kind of at that level, at the level of almost reflex, okay?
Right.
And they looked at liberals versus conservatives, and Will says, here he says, okay, and the liberals were like better at this kind of stuff, okay, by and large. And Will says, in the Slate piece, he says, does this mean liberal brains are fitter? Question mark. Apparently, period. And then he quotes from the study. Liberals are more responsive to informational complexity, ambiguity, and novelty. And then he goes on to point out that, well, look, the sense in which these people were dealing with informational complexity and ambiguity is not the sense in which we normally use those terms, right? I mean, this was just basically a neural reflex test. It doesn't mean that you'd be better able to understand, geopolitics or something, that kind of information complexity. Right.
It might show that liberals have hair triggers and they react to every fad, whereas conservatives have a very fit sort of resistance to reacting to every fad. As he points out, that's what I thought was his good point.
Oh, so this is his good point. That the thing I just said that that they're really kind of conflating two different senses of informational complexity.
No, I wouldn't put it quite that way. But the rapid reaction. The ability to react rapidly might not necessarily be writ large in society, might not necessarily be a good thing. Might not be smart.
Might not. I don't think that was his main point.
No, that's my point.
Okay, well, good. But as for his point, did you buy that or not? This is. I'm hoping to argue that you're wrong.
I actually don't buy it. I think you would expect that people who react to large complexities also react to small complexities, and that's what the study teased out, and it's unsurprising.
Okay, but you see, the thing is, when I went and looked at the study, and unfortunately all I could get a hold of was the abstract, but if the abstract is accurate, you find this quote in the abstract, liberals are more responsive to informational complexity, ambiguity, and novelty, but the context is not the one I thought it was when I read his piece. Okay? What they say, they don't say, okay, from this study about neural reflex, we infer that liberals are more responsive to informational complexity, ambiguity, blah, blah, blah. They say that there is a long, there's like a long history of testing, apparently. Political scientists and psychologists have noted that, on average, conservatives show more structured and persistent cognitive styles, whereas liberals are more responsive to informational complexity, ambiguity, and novelty. So that is an existing finding that actually does mean what it says, okay? They really, the data that have already shown this, apparently, we're talking about the kind of informational complexity we generally would think of and the kind of ambiguity we generally think of. Then these guys had this hypothesis that maybe this actually reflects something going on at the kind of neural level of information processing. So they said, well, let's look for these kinds of things at the neural level. I mean, it's as if the existing finding were that Microsoft software is slow. And you had a hypothesis. You know, it could be the modules interact in an inefficient way, or it could be that if you look at it at the level of the if-then statements, for some weird reason, they're actually slow, right? And these guys said, well, maybe it goes all the way down to the if-then statements, okay?
The what statements?
It really is not the case that, you know, these guys were making the bold claim that because we found this pattern in neural reflex, we can then conclude that liberals are more responsive to informational complexity and ambiguity. That was an existing finding. And these guys were looking into trying to come up with a broad explanation of it.
Very good point, although the PR release they put out, I think, conflated the two and got them a lot of publicity as if they were saying what the long history of testing...
Well, I think they would say this is consistent with that larger finding and a possible explanation of it. But they weren't doing the kind of wild extrapolation
and you don't know which way causality goes. People might become liberals because their brains work faster and become conservatives because their brains work slower, but that tells you nothing about which group is fitter. Some people, their brains may work too fast. They may be, too unstable.
Oh, totally. I mean, yeah, so, no, I think some of the fastest thinkers in the world are the people I would least want to be in charge of things, yeah.
Right.
Well, I feel like I just spent a lot of energy making what maybe wasn't a huge point, but...
No, I think it's very
interesting. I really think that what they're saying... Again, I couldn't get the whole study, but if the quote he uses in the piece is right out of the abstract,
right.
And what they're saying in the abstract is not what I had inferred from the piece.
They were making a much smaller and also almost more interesting point.
Which I suspect is actually wrong, but anyway, it's not crazy.
You're saying get down to the what form of code? The something statement?
Well, I had said if then. That's what programming ultimately kind of comes down to, is a bunch of if then conditional statements.
Oh, okay.
If the letter typed in is this, then
right, okay. God, I thought you said is been.
I didn't, but is that a good transition to Microsoft or what?
It's like all happening. It's all coming together. This only, the blogging heads they don't work seamlessly like this all the time, so we should appreciate it.
We should. We should cherish this moment, Mickey. Do you want to stop and cherish this moment?
No.
Do a little rose smelling?
Our next topic just happens to be Microsoft.
Huh.
What a coincidence.
Again, I don't have anything too profound to say, but I think...
Explain what happened.
Well, I mean, first I'll say that, I used to think Microsoft was totally this inexorable force, and once you had a lock on the desktop operating system, it would be really hard to screw things up, and you would be around forever. Just a number of things have happened that make me wonder, could Microsoft perish, virtually? I mean...
Well, they lost this European antitrust suit, which means what? Which means...
Well, I don't think that's the biggest problem they've encountered lately, but it's true that the European... some European Union court said it was unfair of them to use their operating system to leverage the Windows Media Player to the disadvantage of the competitor Real. Now, and of course that's one thing they've done time and again. They use their control of the operating system to make certain things standard, whether it's an email client, a browser, a media player, and that's how they turn their version of that software into the standard. And it's worked with Real. I mean, we offer both, but Real is like 10% of our business and 10% of our usage. And I swear, soon it will all be Flash. I know I've been promising this for a long time, but soon it will all be Flash. But anyway,
Flash.
So that
is Flash a Microsoft thing?
No, Flash is from Adobe, and it's just more easily cross-platform because it's a whole different approach. The player is, in a certain sense, not on your computer. The player is in the browser, in a sense, or something like that.
So then Microsoft will have failed.
Well,
because we won't be using
the dominance of the Flash system, the growing dominance of Flash on the internet is an example of something it turns out they can't control. But there are other warning signs. I do think the biggest threat to them is the open source movement. I mean, another thing that happened this week is that IBM announced that it is going to offer, the equivalent of like Word and I guess the equivalent of Excel and PowerPoint for free, based on the the Open Office format. And there's already Sun already offers a version of this. I'm guessing IBM will do a better job of it. But anyway, that's going to be yet another alternative. Google unveiled its version of PowerPoint. All this stuff is free.
So you're saying eventually there'll be a free operating system that Microsoft won't be able to sell?
Well, the other thing that happened within the last few weeks is Walt Mossberger of the Wall Street Journal reviewed the desktop version of Linux. Now, what he said was not ready for prime time, but it's clear that the very fact that he was reviewing it signified that it's come a long way. I mean, it used to be nobody ever talked seriously about Linux on the desktop. It was an open source operating system that had succeeded at the server level.
Right.
And I'm guessing from his review that in a year or two you may see a different review of Linux on the desktop. And that will mean that Microsoft is vulnerable at every level. And, I now use both Firefox and Thunderbird is my email client, which is a cousin of Firefox, and they work fine. And in some ways better, and they're free, and you don't get tech support, but you don't really get that with Microsoft anyway, unless you pay a lot of money. So
those aren't operating systems, though, right? They're
not.
Else.
But my point is, if you ask. But all that logic applies to Linux when it becomes desktop ready. Is my point. It's like
right.
it's open source. It has it'll have all the pros and cons of existing open source, and I'm just saying open source works. It's fine. And
that's interesting. So the same thing could happen to operating systems, sort of that happens to the print media, which is everything wants to be free eventually.
Kind of, yeah. And it's just, this has been one of the most amazing and kind of shocking things to me. Open source I continue to kind of marvel at, because it's not just a bunch of people making mercenary calculations, which is what normally governs the business world. There is this element of sheer goodwill, or let me just say, people receiving non-material psychic benefits from, it's called psychic income by economists, I think.
Some people presumably bundle this free Linux and sell it, right? Because their version is a little better. Yeah, that often happens.
In fact, Red Hat is a Linux provider. And so there can be a company involved that charges a little for it and offers tech support, but you can have several different companies competing to do that, to sell essentially the same open source software. But with Firefox and Thunderbird, they work, and the forums provide me the tech support I need.
Oh, God, you have to go to a forum. That requires interacting.
Well, it requires interacting with something. Well, no, actually, it usually requires searching and finding the person who's already asked the question you want the answer to.
Okay. As long as you don't have to deal with a human
Occasionally,
being.
you might have to ask the question yourself.
Okay, that's all.
But
I guess I thought the European thing was just, worst comes to worst, Microsoft avoids Europe.
No, I think the threat is ultimately deeper than that, and part of it is that Microsoft has made some real missteps. Vista apparently has its real downsides. Jim Fallows wrote a piece. He had earlier embraced it, and he said, avoid this. He reinstalled XP. And their new Office has a major problem if you already have a huge bundle of email you're importing into it, or at least it did 3 months ago. Maybe there's a fix, but it was stunningly slow if you had a lot of email in your archives. And they just, haven't done a great deal. I would close with a plug for their Virtual Earth. And full disclosure, my brother has kind of worked on this, but I swear, if you go to Microsoft Virtual Earth and download it, you will see that it's has a whole dimension that Google Earth does not have. It allows you to do basically 3D fly-throughs of the cities that have been successfully mapped with aerial photography and so on, including like San Francisco, Philadelphia, I think Manhattan now, Seattle. And it's amazing. It's amazing. But that's kind of an indictment of Microsoft because nobody knows about it. It's a real advantage they have over Google Earth right now, and nobody knows about it. And you know, they have the money to market it if they want.
I went to the next convention here, and there was something called Whirlwind by NASA, which was a similar thing.
By NASA?
Yeah, NASA, and you could sort of fly all over the world using publicly available satellite technology, satellite images in 3D.
But this is in 3D. It is like...
No, this was in 3D, and it blew my mind, and I said, how old is it? And they said it's 3 years old. So I'm obviously not on the cutting edge of these things.
Well, yeah, but it's only fairly recently that Microsoft has started offering this on the desktop. You have to download a little software, and the interaction using a mouse is a little cruder than it would be if you actually had the airplane, you know, steering wheel and throttle. But
right.
It's like that. It's like flying through San Francisco and going down and taking a close look at stuff. It's amazing.
Huh. I'd be even more impressed if you didn't have a sibling who was involved in it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but it's true. You know me. I would never...
Yeah.
I mean, you should be impressed that I did the critique of Microsoft I did, notwithstanding the fact that I have a sibling working for Microsoft.
I am impressed. I'm continually impressed.
Thank you.
Even.
You know what we never talked about, Mickey?
What?
We were going to talk about Blackwater.
What do you have to... Blackwater?
Maybe I could turn that into, like, you know, a cultural quiz. You know so much about pop culture. What rock group did the song Blackwater?
The Doobie Brothers?
You got it faster than me. When I thought of that this morning, I first thought of Creedence Clearwater, just because, you know, Clearwater, Blackwater, I guess. But then I did think of, to my credit, I did think of the Doobie Brothers.
I got it faster than you. I got it instantly.
You did. No, you're better. You're better. You are the czar of pop culture. Well, just quickly, my little op-ed on that is, you know, like a year and a half ago, I talked to a guy who had been shooting footage in Iraq, and he came back and he said, these Blackwater guys are out of control. They're crazy. And I thought about it, and I thought, you know, we should not have these private contractors. If they're going to be acting in our name, in America's name, they shouldn't have guns. I mean, people who have guns, whose behavior is going to be associated with America, should be employees of the government, I think, and should be subject to government training and the Uniform Code of Military Justice and everything else. I mean, of course, the basis for this is that Blackwater, there's this big controversy in Iraq because they killed some civilians, and they've been their license has been suspended, although apparently, according to the New York Times piece, it turns out they didn't have one to begin with. Do you disagree?
No, I don't disagree. I wonder how many of them there are and whether they provide an essential element of security. Also, it's kind of, and what will happen after they go, I agree they should go. I mean, it's kind of handy to have these private groups around, so if there's an atrocity, instead of being able to blame it on the U.S. military, we can just say, oh, it's those out-of-control contractors, we've taken away their license and kicked them out of the country.
Yeah, but see, that's the illusion, because that's not the way it's playing in Iraq. They're saying, oh, the Americans killed these civilians, and these Blackwater guys are more likely to kill the civilians than trained military people are.
Yes, but the Iraqi government is getting a lot of street cred by kicking them out of the country, which they can't do to us. So
it's not even totally clear they can do it to them. I mean, if they can't do it to us, what is the meaning of the sovereignty we supposedly granted them, I would ask. But
well, they could do it to us, but they don't want to do it to us.
Okay, well, yeah, that may be convenient for them, but you know, at both levels, this is bad. I mean, one is we're fighting an insurgency there, so public opinion matters. The other thing is, same logic applies in the global war on terror, you know. Public opinion, you know, leads to impinges on the recruitment of terrorists.
Well, so. That is what was interesting about the question that Warner asked Petraeus, are you making America safer? And he said he didn't know.
I want to defend that answer, but go ahead.
Well, it's a perfectly defensible answer, but what it meant is it's not his job to consider whether winning the Iraq War causes so much blowback that it's not worth it.
Well,
it's his job to win the Iraq War.
Well, exactly. I would go further, and I'm surprised he didn't put it the way you did, and even put it the way I'm about to, which is that not only is it not his job, it is his job not to get involved in public debates about this. If you take civilian control of the military seriously, it's literally his job to not answer that question.
Well, it's classic stupid political media behavior to expect to ask a general to opine about matters that are really within the purview of politics.
Well, it was political behavior, not media behavior, and then...
Well, the press clearly wants to build Petraeus up into this, godlike oracle who can advise about everything.
Well, it's surprising. He's so savvy. It is surprising to me that he didn't put it the way we just did.
I think he was sort of taken aback by the question.
I think he was. But
and Bush didn't want him to give the honest answer. I think Bush sort of wants him to be an oracle too. Bush wants him to engage in a forthright defense of the war on terror.
Yeah.
So he doing the right thing would displease virtually everybody. Would it displease Warner? Would displease the press? Would displease Bush?
So we should
anyway.
Move on.
Yeah, well, we're almost through. I hope.
Now that's another good segue. You're talking about Petraeus, and then I use the phrase "move on." This is this has been a banner week for segues.
But what are you segueing to?
Well, it doesn't matter. The key thing is I use the phrase "move on." Like MoveOn.org, the Petraeus ad.
I'm very impressed.
To comments. We're about to wrap it up. I swear. Our promise to viewers. We're about to stop. First of all, there have been some good dingle-links in the comments section. Simon Willard put together this dingle-link demonstrating my vanity, which is good. I think it was in maybe the Joel Achenbach dialogue.
Wasn't that years ago?
Well, no, I did another one. I'm glad to hear you're paying so much attention to the site, Mickey. Thanks. I've really been reading your blog, too.
Fair enough.
And by the way, not to contrast our site with your blog, but we actually put new content on ours every once in a while.
What are you talking about? I have 3 items a day.
Oh, I'm sorry.
What was that all about? You just lashed out mindlessly.
You always claim that you put up 3 items every day, but maybe I should refresh my browser. The last one I've seen was 2002.
No, the kausfiles link was broken for a while. Slate accidentally, in the course of a software rejiggering, wiped out the only link to the kausfiles homepage.
Are you dissing your current employer?
It took a couple of days. No. It was all for the greater good, but I was sort of collateral damage for a few days. No, I'm actually really impressed with the Slate people, but they had bigger fish to fry, and I was a small fish.
And you would say that even if they weren't paying your rent, right?
And I got trampled. I would say that if I wasn't paying. Yes, the question is if they were not.
I know what you mean, Mickey. I know.
Say it anyway.
It's late in the dialogue. Our sentences get a little.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, now, but Nate. Now this is uncanny. That guy's institutional memory is disturbing. You know that whole thing about I promised to get back to your hypochondria. Not that I would call it that, but your hypochondria.
Yeah.
When I did that thing, suggesting seriously, actually, that the psychology of your whatever synonym I would substitute for your hypochondria is related to your aversion to immigration, he fished out this dingle-link where I had made this very oblique allusion to that kind of parallel, but hadn't said it explicitly. And it went way back. It's scary that he's keeping this kind of track because the great downside of doing this stuff where you go on every week, you drink too much coffee, you say regrettable stuff, is that that it'll be there forever.
But it's not searchable.
That's the problem with keeping Nate on this planet, Mickey. We should talk about this offline, but the question I'm asking is, does he know too much, if you know what I mean?
Nate is a little dangerous, I agree.
We might want to send a couple of Blackwater guys down to Arkansas, where I believe Nate has been cited, because it's just dangerous.
I think you're about to commit a felony. So, except this is all a joke, of course.
No, it's threat. What threat?
But,
no, I would never kill Nate, because he did the first Blogging Heads trailer, which started a whole genre.
I did notice that this article we didn't talk about the Darwinian basis of morality implies that supports the theory that revulsion at certain things does have a connection to preventing the spread of infection. So
totally.
Hypochondria is in our genes, Bob.
Some degree of it is. Well, an aversion to certain kinds of things. I mean, if you ask why, like rotting flesh is universally considered something to not get too close to, that seems to have to do with the risk of infection.
The example Dr. Haidt uses is people having sex doggy style in public. He's getting into Brokeback Mountain territory there, Bob.
Did they say that in the New York Times article?
Yes.
Because I may discuss that. I may be doing a little guest appearance on Science Saturday this week to fill in, and we'll probably discuss Haidt's work more generally.
I think, doggy style would be a good hit getter.
Speaking of doggy style,
yeah.
Here's a comment. Here's a comment that came in. It was in the comment section from a person whose username we had never seen before. It says, Ezra is very sexy. I love his lips. This was on an Ezra Klein dialogue. I'd like to spend hours kissing him and a whole lot more. Does anyone know how I can hook up with him? He doesn't seem to check his MySpace. I'm a hottie and could easily more than satisfy him. Totally in love. Mickey, I'm not saying I think the answer to this is yes, but I have to check. This is not your sock puppet, right?
Was this a man or a woman?
Well, I guess that's something we don't know for sure. I only ask because you have...
I guarantee you that I did not write that.
Because you had sent some cross words in Ezra's direction, and sometimes hostility masks a kind of insecure affection.
It does, but I guarantee you that that's not the case here. Plus, Ezra is a hottie. A lot of women have crushes on Ezra.
Well, maybe...
women with severe policy blind spots.
Speaking of women, this is like the segue record. Speaking of women, we thought we only had 2 women in the comment section. Well, first of all, the commenter known as Look, I maybe knew this, but there was more evidence that Look is a woman. Look says so herself. And then there was this new commenter who showed up, announced herself to be a woman, commented cogently and at length, and hasn't been back for a few days, but really was prolific for a couple of days, so that would be 4.
That's very impressive.
Isn't it?
I think eventually the commenters will just be able to have a conversation without us. They don't need us.
Yeah, we could do the thing that Petraeus does sometimes. I don't know if he does this anymore, but he used to just... His blog post would have the word thread in it, and that would be all it said, and it would start a thread.
Well, at Slate, there's this thing called Kausfiles Special, which I don't put up anymore, but it spawned a lively dialogue. They've taken it over like a hermit crab's inhabiting a shell, and they're just talking to each other. They have nothing to do with me. They don't talk about me. But there's so many of them that Slate decided not to kill it because, they're getting all the hits. So.
Wait, what is this called?
Kausfiles Special.
Really? A whole Kausfiles like fan club?
No, they're not a fan club. They're just people who happen to have a habit of going to that space to talk to each other.
But they like you.
No, they don't even care that I exist. But they, but the Blogging Heads is like that. They're going to be able to dispense with us and just talk amongst themselves. And eventually they'll all have cameras. And they'll be talking to each other with cameras. And you and I will be completely superfluous.
No, we do want to. I think this should be in our not too long-term vision that, user-generated content, they call it in the biz. It would be interesting to see some of these people match up,
I'm sort of worried about what some of them look like, but hey, this is Insult Our Commenters Day on my part.
I think they're all wonderful people. I do worry sometimes, though, that they're all just Lee Siegel. Do you think there's...
No.
He's just kind of working something out, a little internal tension out?
Unless they start talking about their imaginary cats, I say they're not Lee Siegel. They're not nearly pretentious enough to be Lee Siegel.
Finally, I'd like to say a word or two about erectile dysfunction, Mickey.
Good. I think you should close with that every week.
Joel Achenbach and I got into this, and there's a comment on that from Blog and Noggin saying, I have to say I'm a little shocked that Bob doesn't know how ED drugs work, because I asked, is it just fixing a plumbing problem like Viagra or something, or does it actually expand the range of sex partners that you would find attractive, right? Make you kind of less discriminating or something.
Interesting question.
Well, it is, and Blog and Noggin acts like it's, like every grade school kid knows, which is possible.
Which is very
but
revealing.
The reason, now I had actually, the answer is supposedly it just fixes the plumbing, it doesn't change who you're attracted to. But the reason I'm puzzled is I thought that it was used recreationally by people who don't have plumbing problems, right? Have you not heard that?
Oh, Hugh Hefner touts it as a recreational drug, yes.
Well, yeah, but Hugh may have, who knows, but he could have plumbing problems. The Playboy Mansion could have plumbing problems.
I understand, but recreationally, people who have plumbing problems want to have recreation, so they use it as a
Fine,
recreational
but what I'm
drug.
suggesting is people who don't have plumbing problems, I thought were using it. No?
Using it. Yes, no, I think that's right. Well,
then it can't just be plumbing problems.
No, because, Bob, God, we don't want to talk about this on the air.
Totally.
Sometimes the plumbing half works.
We don't want to talk about this on the air, Mickey.
I think.
Do you have any anecdotes you'd like to share with us?
You need Dennis Miller to talk about it. I've seen Dennis Miller talking about this. So now I can never run for office.
No, you can't. And just to make sure, Mickey. Hey, wait! There's a moose.
What?
Somebody, I think Brenda sent me a moose. Maybe.
You have a moose?
I do now. It arrived in the mail, and I think it's. I think it came from Blogging Head Central, which is presided over by Brenda.
Can you brandish your moose?
I'm brandishing it. It's not as formidable as yours.
Your moose my moose is bigger than your moose.
Do you have yours out?
Yeah.
Well, let's see whose is bigger, buddy. Ooh. Dominate that.
Mine is charging right now, so anyway.
Okay, well, we probably should leave it there after all. Let's save some suspense. But remind me next time we talk to bring up erectile dysfunction, okay?
This is turning into romper room.
What's that?
This is turning into romper room.
Yeah, well, what was it before?
It was better than this.
Okay. Okay.